So Alabama's upset the Vanderbilt, shocked the college football world. And during this loss, you had two-time captain Malachi Moore, who pretty much threw a temper tantrum on the field due to his frustration from his team's performance. He threw his mouthpiece. He ended up kicking the ball when Vanderbilt was trying to nil out the rest of the clock. And this is something that you never expect out of an Alabama team, because Alabama, when you think of this football team, which what this program has been so many years under Nick Saban, discipline, not tolerating any BS on the field, and then you get Kalen DeBoer who comes in, who isn't as tough on players as what Nick Saban is. Kalen DeBoer, he's not one of those coaches that's a yeller, a screamer. He's going to cuss out and berate guys on the sidelines like what Nick Saban has done. But it was really surprising to me to see Malachi Moore do what he did. There was a situation where Alabama was trying to sub him out the game and he refused to be taken out. And it's fair to say that if Nick Saban was still the coach, Malachi Moore probably wouldn't have went about things the way that he did against Vandy. Because one thing about Nick Saban, when he tells you to do something, you do it. He ain't want to hear no back talk, no flack. And under Kalen DeBoer, you know, when you got Malachi Moore just wilding out like this, and remind you, this is somebody who probably is the only remaining member from Alabama's 2020 national championship team. So with somebody that has this much experience, that's been with the program for so long, you don't expect this kind of behavior. He was never doing anything like this when Nick Saban was there, but now all of a sudden he's cutting loose against Kalen DeBoer, pretty much running amok. You know, there are some fair questions to be had when it comes to the new era of Alabama football under Kalen DeBoer. He's going about handling certain situations a lot differently than what Nick Saban would. Maybe he's not one of those coaches that's about trying to address in-house issues on the sidelines. Maybe he probably prefers to handle them behind closed doors. Maybe that's when he starts giving it to players. But, you know, is Kalen DeBoer a little bit too soft? I feel like he is, because you got to remember that Kalen DeBoer is a West Coast guy. Guys on the West Coast don't have as many character issues as what some of these players that come from the South do. Guys from the South are a little bit more, you know, nonchalant in terms of how they handle criticism from coaches. You know, a coach could tell them one thing and they go in one ear and outside the other, and they still continue to do their own thing. But guys from the West Coast, they don't tend to be as problematic as these Southern players are. And playing high school football in the South, I understand that there's a lot more ego that these players tend to have. And guys from the West Coast, you know, it's just a different kind of personality that you have to coach with when you're coaching those guys versus these kids that you now are inheriting down in Tuscaloosa. You know, Nick Saban was a strict disciplinarian. Now, he did allow players to make mistakes, but just because he was willing to give certain players second chances didn't mean that he wasn't strict. You know, Nick Saban was often viewed as not being a lot of fun, strictly business. Kalen DeBoer seems to be more as a player-friendly kind of coach where, you know, he's all about trying to be liked by the players. And there's nothing wrong with that. You don't have to always be downright hard on certain kids just to get them to play well. You know, you can be a easygoing guy who doesn't really scream a lot, doesn't really give it to the players, and still be a well-coached team. You know, it's different ways that are having a successful football program. Just because Nick Saban won one way at Alabama doesn't mean that Kalen DeBoer has to copy and paste his formula for success. You know, every coach is different. And Kalen DeBoer, when you listen to him talk in his press conference, you know, he's not really somebody that you would think is really a Nick Saban kind of coach. But just because he's a little bit softer on players than what Saban was, doesn't mean that he's not going to work out in Alabama. Kalen DeBoer has won everywhere he's been. NAIA ball. He led his alma mater to 3 national championships. He won at Fresno. He won at Washington. If you win everywhere you go, how can people really question how you run your operation if you've succeeded everywhere? And even though losing to Vanderbilt is one of those unforgivable losses that a school like Alabama should never have, it's just one loss. Kalen DeBoer beat Georgia last week, and everybody was singing his praises. Now, Vandy beats Bama, and all of a sudden, this dude may not be the right fit to replace Nick Saban. It's one game. There's a lot of football left to be played, and this is a chaotic season that we've been seeing so far. There's been tons of upsets. Damn near nearly everybody's going to end up having a shocking loss or two by the time this season concludes. So I believe there are a lot of overreactions to this Alabama loss to Vandy. I know it's bad. I know it's inexcusable. But to start questioning a guy like Kalen DeBoer's ability to coach and build a program, I think is a bit, unnecessary. Because if Alabama was like 1-4 or 1-5, then it would be a fair conversation. But it's still early to be trying to draw conclusions about if Kalen DeBoer is running Alabama football the right way for them to have championship success. He's a great coach. He proved that when Alabama beat Georgia. And although they've been playing some bad football since the second half of that Georgia game, this is still one of the best teams in college football from a talent standpoint. They still got a very good coaching staff. What this Vanderbilt loss was for Kalen DeBoer in Alabama was a wake-up call. It was a reality check that, hey, we need to change some things up. We need to get back to the drawing board and find a way to get ourselves back playing the great football that we was prior to the second half against Georgia. This is one of those wake-up calls that for a coach like Kalen DeBoer, he's going to take it on the chin and he's going to make the necessary adjustments. Just because he isn't screaming at guys on the sidelines doesn't mean that he's not giving them discipline. This is a pretty good coach. He's won everywhere he's been, and I believe that he was the best replacement that Alabama could have possibly gotten for Nick Saban. So I'm not really worried about the whole locker room concerns that people have. I'm not worried about the culture. I think that these are overreactions to a really upsetting loss. Malachi Moore probably wasn't the only player that felt this way. And I'm not excusing his actions. All I'm saying is that you don't have to scream at guys during the games on the sidelines. There's other ways to handle these kinds of issues.